Scene 1. Luke goes to complete his training. Luke arrives on Dagobah and lands near Yoda's house. Approaching, he speaks, seeking Master Yoda. He enters his house and finds it empty. He looks around and the fire ashes are cold. Luke exits the house and sits next to R2, telling him that Yoda is nowhere in his house, and nowhere around. He then seats himself, running his hands through his hair, telling R2 that he thought when he left that he counted on being able to come back to complete his training, saying that he cannot now become a Jedi. R2 is sympathetic while Luke sits in his misery, until he hears the voice of his master. Looking up, he sees Yoda's apparition appear nearby, standing atop the fallen branch. R2 notices him and Luke looks up in disbelief. Standing, he approaches and speaks to him, telling Yoda that he returned to complete his training. Yoda tells him that he requires no more training, and that he waited in vain for Luke's return, and that although he himself was strong in the Force, he could yet not extend his lifespan. Yoda says that Luke must still confront Vader. Luke asks if Darth Vader is his father, and then asks why Obi-Wan had told him differently, and Yoda says that he told Obi-Wan for the sake of protecting them and preventing his children from pursuing their father's way. Yoda mentions another, his sister. Luke realizes that it is Leia, though Yoda warns him to hide his feelings for her, or they might serve the Emperor. Yoda disappears and Luke remains looking for a moment, then stands and tells R2 they must get back to the ship. He walks and looks around at the places where he had done his Jedi training, raising up a piece of metal from the ground. Then he tells R2 that he doesn't think he can go alone, and Obi-Wan speaks to him. Obi-Wan gives Luke encouragement, telling him that the Jedi's path is difficult but true, and that he now is the last among them, and that the responsibility of keeping the Jedi Order alive and rebuild their numbers now rests with him. But that he and Yoda would remain with him, but that the Force itself would be his greatest ally, telling him not to allow his fear of Vader or the Emperor to overwhelm him, but to go into the lion's den without fear and rely upon the Force for his protection. Scene 2. Han thinks he ought to leave. There is a great amount going on as numerous people approach Leia as they are getting prepared for their greatest battle against the Empire. Han makes his way to Leia and asks if he can do anything to help. They speak, but Leia only asks him if Luke is back yet, and he says that he isn't. While Leia says she'll see if they can find something for him, but mentions that she'll feel much happier once Luke is back with them. Han's confidence sinks. He mumbles something to her, and Leia recognizes. He walks off and goes to the docking bay which holds the Millennium Falcon. Chewie is working on the ship when Han enters. He looks sullen for a moment, then when Chewie sees him asks if they're all ready. He acknowledges, and then looks back over his shoulder, telling Chewie to warm up the ship and get it ready. Chewie asks him a question and he replies that he's not sure if he is sure, but repeats to him to get it ready. Chewie re-enters the ship and goes into the cockpit. Han is about to climb up the boarding ramp when Lando appears. He says he's surprised to find him there, asking if he's preparing to play a role in the battle. Han prevaricates, then replies that they don't know what to do with him. The entire rebellion is amassing here, and they have little use for an ex-smuggler and his ship. Lando asks about Leia, and he says she's sympathetic, but it's not really in her control. Lando senses something is going on. Han asks him what he's there for, and he says he's scouting for a command ship to take into the raid, and that he was hoping that Han might go with him. Then Han discloses to Lando his intentions to leave and says he's not running, only that he wants to be gone by the time Luke comes back. And then Lando asks him if this is all about Luke. Leia then appears in the observation room and notices Han speaking to Lando. They are far away and down below her. Lando asks if there's anything he can say to get him to stay, but Han says it's best for everyone if he leaves. He's sure that nobody will miss him, but Lando says he surely will, and they hug one another. But he promises to Lando that if the rebellion fails to destroy the Death Star, he swears that he will come back and complete the job. But Lando says if they fail he'll never know if Han will keep his word. He tells him he will. Han then boards the Falcon and when Leia sees him board she turns and goes out. Han comes into the cockpit and asks Chewie if everything is ready. He barks in the affirmative, and then Han looks over and gives a final wave to Lando. Then tells Chewie to energize sublight engines, and the ship begins to hum, all ready for launching. Lando withdraws away from the ship, as it is sitting there. Chewie is sitting waiting for the command to launch. Han looks out the docking bay at the stars outside. Everything hangs for a moment as Han pauses before hitting the ignition. Scene 3, Rebel Attack Briefing. Leia prepares herself, and walks out before the entire assembled Rebel command. Presenting herself with confidence, she addresses them, and the importance of this battle to the rebellion, but more so for the galaxy, and then introduces Mundia, now Mon Mothma. After she speaks of the attack, it is then turned over to Admiral Akbar, of the Calamari, who reveals the specifics of what they are attempting to accomplish, while General Nadine has been in charge of organizing the forces. He says that they had trouble finding someone to take command of the strike force to Endor, but announces the good news that someone volunteered to head the mission, and asks him to step forward. That person is Han Solo. Leia cries out Han's name, as though she thought she'd never see him again, and he shakes it off, answering that he did in the end accept the mission, despite the dangers. Han maintains a professional aspect about the entire mission, addressing Leia as the princess. He then says that he's looking for others who would make up his squad on the planet, and several of the men agree, including Chewie. Leia agrees to go with him too. Then Luke arrives, and says he will go with the crew also. As they go to collect their gear, before proceeding to the hangar, Han passes along some final instructions, saying that none of them should be caught alone in the forest at night, and to take refuge in the trees, or use a strong light to drive away any of the night creatures. But he also says that rebel reconnaissance to the moon of Endor indicated that the Imperials do not stray too far from their base, but that they do go on scouting patrols. But he gives them the warning not to be separated from the main group, because there is some sort of creature on the planet who attacks, and that they eat people, who will not discriminate between themselves and the Imperials. Scene 4. Captured by the Ewoks. Leia wakes in the forest, and realizes she doesn't know where she is. There is only a short time before sunset, though as she moves on she is found by two biker scouts, who then begin to take her back to their bikes. They take her gun and communicator. They sense there might be something nearby, and the one tells the other to scan the area. He takes a hand scanner and moves out into the open. But several rocks strike the biker scout in the head, and he falls. Leia ducks away, and the other trooper swings around with his gun, but he too is knocked down by stones. Leia looks out cautiously, and sees the two scouts lying there, but can now see the ferns being pushed away, and hears creatures moving in on her position. She dips behind the fallen log. She moves slowly, crawling to the other end of the log to get away. She attempts to move away, but a creature suddenly jumps out at her, screaming a loud cry. Leia screams and recoils in fear, only to see it is a diminutive furry critter carrying a small spear. He is waving the spear in her direction with hostility, but then sniffs the air. He looks with curiosity, and then looks at the setting sun, and makes a noise, and calls the others to him. Other Ewoks come out and move towards her. She can see that these little creatures have very sharp carnivorous teeth. The Ewoks are nervous as they notice the sun getting low. The Ewoks take Leia's arms and she struggles, but they are able to tie her hands together. Luke rejoins the others, but they will have trouble detecting anyone given the number of life forms that come out at night. They also say that it is getting dark, and they have to build fires to keep the night creatures away, and can only look for Leia in the morning. Luke asks if they shouldn't go looking, and he says that if she's alive she knows what to do. He asks what if she's injured, and he says that it's probably already too late. Leia and the two biker troops are brought up an elevator which carries them up to the Ewok habitat. She watches as the Ewoks build a fire beneath the two biker scouts to cook them for their dinner, but she cannot watch, and moving away reaches the railing, and nearly stumbles back over it. Far beneath she can hear something moving through the trees. She looks around for any other sign of light in the forest. Then she turns, and sees a number of Ewoks have gathered behind her. They approach her curiously, and begin pulling at her clothes, and each of them wishes to take a piece of her clothing. They each take it, and sniff them, then the Ewoks move towards her. In the morning the rebels go off to look for Leia, but they are surrounded by Imperials. R2 and 3PO wait at the camp, but they have never come back. He asks R2 to scan with his sensor, but he cannot detect them, and 3PO says they must be near, and there must be something wrong with R2's sensing equipment. Then they are surrounded by several large creatures, and 3PO is very fearful. The group of rebels are being led back to the base with their arms raised. As they walk, suddenly something drops down from the trees. It is a group of Wookiees who fight off the Imperials, and free Chewie and the other rebels. They return with them to the Wookiee home, and learn that they are the survivors of a Wookiee starship that crash-landed there, and only 11 warriors remain. Luke then says that they have to find Leia, and a couple of the Wookiees go with them, while the remainder of the rebels wait there. Scene 5. Attack on the Imperial base. They go to the Wookiee base, and one of the Ewoks, the one that found Leia, tags along behind them. They ask her why, and she answers quite embarrassed that she thinks he believes she's engaged to him. They laugh at this. So he goes after her when they go to attack the Imperial base, trailing after Leia the entire time, though she attempts to convince him that she is not engaged to him, and that there is nothing between them, but he doesn't understand. C-3PO remains with R2 in the Ewok village. Then Wicket returns telling him what is going on, that the others have been captured, but he cannot convince the Ewoks to go with him. C-3PO agrees to go help his friends, and he realizes he is the only one who is committed to go, although R2 agrees to accompany him. The Ewoks' minds cannot quite wrap around the concepts he is presenting them with, so the three of them go off together. 3PO shows up with R2 and the Ewok, and wonders what they can do, and R2 suggests they make a distraction, and Wicket attempts to fire a laser gun he picked up and starts firing everywhere with it. The Imperials take cover, and then 3PO reveals himself, and the Imperials send troopers up to capture them, but then the Ewoks rise out of the undergrowth and attack the Imperials. Scene 6. Mon Calamari retreat from the battle. The Death Star fires and destroys one of the rebel fleet ships, and Admiral Akbar wishes that the Calamari forces retreat. Lando, though, attempts to persuade him otherwise, to give the surface force more time to disable the shield. But another blast from the Death Star destroys yet another ship, and he says they cannot hold up against the power of the Death Star, and orders the Mon Calamari fleet to retreat. They pull away from the battle, and Admiral It sends a couple Star Destroyers after them as they go into hyperspace, while Lando commands the forces to remain engaging the Imperials and to attack the remaining Star Destroyers. The shield station is destroyed by Han and the rebel force, and then Lando leads the others in the attack on the Death Star. The Star Destroyers return and approach the Imperial fleet, with It saying that the rebel forces will soon be entirely defeated. Then the 5 Calamari ships come out of hyperspace behind them. They are surprised at their return, until when the 2 Star Destroyers get near enough they begin to fire on the rest of the Imperial ships, including the Executor. These 2 Star Destroyers have been taken over by Mon Calamari forces. They concentrate their fire on the Super Star Destroyer. Heavily damaged, the Executor is unable to alter course, and plunges straight into the Death Star. Lando and Wedge fly into the Death Star, and arrive at the reactor core, destroy it, and escape the Death Star before it explodes.